We were talking last night about a subject to talk about, and we came up with the subject of war because there's so much war going on at the moment. And,
Right.
and I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that on some levels, it's a pretentious topic to talk about since both of us probably have never experienced a war. On the other hand, there's a lot of war going on, and I think when the Ukraine war started, it was a bit of a surprise. Like there was an illusion that we had gone beyond sort of like war in the European realm anyway, and that was kind of over. And then in the past few years, there's just been war again, like all over the place. So that's I guess that's what we thought we would talk about today. Very heavy topic, but any thoughts?
Well, I mean, we wanted to talk about what is war,
Yeah.
right? So, as you say, it's a very complicated topic because nobody of us is kind of involved in it directly,
Yeah.
from the personal experience, yet it's increasingly becoming a part of the world. And and so it's a very delicate subject because, how do we think about war? And the things that are attached to it and the cognitive dissonance that goes along with it. I think it's one of these themes that and topics that don't stack up properly in the different strata of analysis, and that's why it's so complicated.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast with Rick Rubin the other day, and it was the guy who founded Vice magazine. And when Vice magazine went into video, what they did would they would just fly somewhere and film a war, like in a almost like war porn, like a voyeuristic kind of thing. So I was thinking about how war has become sort of voyeuristic, and also the things that they were going and filming was quite remarkable. The guy from Vice went to Liberia and filmed and sort of started, which is one of the worst places on earth in terms of violence. It was founded by former American slaves. It was actually founded by America, and the former slaves went to Liberia and then started enslaving the population. And it's just full of tribes and wars and generals. And so these vice guys they flew into Liberia and they started to film this general, and he was called General Buck Naked. Because him and his army, they used to fight naked, and they were also cannibals, so they ate the people that they fought, they consumed them. Um, And this guy, General Buck Naked, who was a cannibal, there was like the Vice crew was in there talking to him, and he was bragging about how at the beginning of the battle they would take a, let's say, a baby, and they would eat the heart of the baby before the battle, and they would go into battle stark naked with their machine guns and whatever, and sort of feel invincible, and so it's just this is something so beyond our imagination and our cozy little worlds. What a horror and hell show, and but also what glee and perverse joy people take in uh you know the most heinous kinds of behaviors.
Right. I mean, so where do we start here? Because we both love the film. So there's a lot to
Thin Red
unpack there.
Line.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about where to start off the conversation, because there's
Mm.
a lot of stuff what you said. Um, I think, that we both love the movie The Thin Red Line. I think
Yeah.
it's a fantastic movie from Terrence Malick because it's a meditation about war, basically, and a meditation about the most heinous things people are able to do under circumstances, but it's contrasted with a meditation about nature
Hmm.
and how nature is always at war with itself, and how war and being at war with itself is an integral part of existence itself. And so, and that makes that movie very somber. It's a very devastating and somber meditation about existence and war. It's beautifully
Well,
shot.
it's also very erotic too, or something. There's something very erotic about it. I don't know how to say that, but all of Terrence Malick's movies are very erotic, I find. So it's like violence, but also there's this sensual aspect of the film. And the fact that, in a Spielberg movie, it's all moralism, right? It's all good versus evil, and it's completely humanocentric. It's just the human beings, fighting each other and their various dramas. And, some of those films are very good, but the Malick films take that meditation to a new level, because they include the natural world in the carnage, in the beauty. It's sort of like there's beauty in carnage. I remember the main actor, he was kind of a Christ figure or something. Like he had this like strange quality to him. And then he gets killed at the end. Uh, in this tropical, dense, beautiful landscape. And I remember the look on his eyes before he was about to die and how they did that. And they it was almost erotic or something.
It's very intimate, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, while we were talking yesterday about how we approach the topic, and I was, in terms of that movie, so it's again, it's like one of those things that don't really stack up very well, because it's like it always implies a sort of cognitive dissonance, at least for me, and I don't know how it is for you, but I mean, I don't want war for me, right?
Mhm.
I don't want to partake in war. I don't want any of my loved ones, my family, my friends being involved or, threatened by war. I don't want, my tribe, my city, my country, my continent, Europe or the world. I don't want war for anybody, because I mean, I'm an empathetic kind of
Mhm. Of
being.
course, of course.
Okay, so that stacks up very well. I don't want that for me. I don't want that for everybody. But then suddenly a problem arises that, okay, as long as there were human beings, there was war. You find warfare in the animal kingdom. You find deviations of war. It's like we are at war with ourselves. Our culture is at war. In terms of civil wars, it's like the natural world is at war with itself, and so it is
Mhm.
it is a it is an integral part of existence. And so if you understand this, if you understand that it is a part, how do you stack up that very insight into the fact that nobody wants war?
Yeah.
So how do you navigate that space? How do you yeah,
Well,
navigate it?
maybe it's not true that nobody wants war, in a sense.
Right. Okay.
I remember I had a friend who was kind of he was in a military his whole life, and his father was a military guy, and he's in the Swedish army, and I had all these conversations with him, and from a very young age he wanted to go to war, and he wanted to kill, and he was very aware about that. It's just what he wanted to do. It's like it wasn't a moral thing at all, really. It was just how he was built. And I knew this guy over time, and he kind of changed. And he became sort of, I think he took LSD a couple times, and his whole perspective of life changed, and he became kind of more peace and love oriented, as I knew him. But he was built in a way to be a soldier. Like he loved war. And there's a book by James Hillman. I can't remember. It was called Soul Code, where he writes very well about war. James Hillman. He talked about this general. I can't remember, General MacArthur or somebody like that was talking about his love, this incredible love he had of war,
Oh, I
because
know that
war
quote.
brings
Yes.
out all of the intensities of our nature. It brings out our heroic. It brings out our worst. It gives us the whole spectrum of who we are when it comes. And so he was expressing his love for war, which sounds very to say that sounds again, that sounds like a terrible thing to say, um but um but it seems to be it is part of who we are and has been since the beginning of time. So we have to think about it, I think.
Well, sociologically speaking, I mean, it's a very well documented fact that in war, in the combat situations, there are moments of utter elation, and this is what Hillman also describes, but it's like
Mhm.
it's very well documented that there are, and it's horrible to say, but it is what happens when the sense of self vanishes in favor of a sense of the core, a sense of purpose. And while it's a kind of flow state, elated flow state that is
Mhm.
similar to, athletics or lovemaking, where just the sense of self completely fuses with a higher purpose, higher meaning, and higher group sense of being and acting in the world. And a lot of people do this because they want to, because the what Hillman describes, and I remember that quote. He says, um, "Oh God, do I get this right? That." I had it now. I forgot it. I will come to that back later.
Mhm.
But um, yeah, yes, because the sense of self that gets destroyed leads to the insight that I will be undying in a kind of way because the core, the group will survive. Even
Mhm.
if I die, my state will survive. And so therefore I will survive. And so it's a very interesting kind of shifting in perspectives that's going on there. You got what I mean? It's like I'm expressing that not
Yeah, well, it's a sense of the greater of transcendence that
right.
people there's a primal need for transcendence, and people search for it in all kinds of crazy ways, right? Skydiving, sex, whatever, whatever. There's a need to have, yeah, for this kind of transcendent flow state. And I think you find it in heavenly types of experiences, right? I was just in Hydra Island and I thought it was all heavenly and beautiful. It was just like I'm in heaven, sort of. And it felt like a
Right.
flow state being there. But I think you also feel it when you're in hell as well. There's a kind of transcendence because of the intensity. So you feel this transcendent flow, so it's something like that. Because it is, war is hell. I mean, obviously, um but I think I guess it's one of the most intense kind of states that human beings can feel. And perhaps in our sort of safe, bourgeois, a little bit depressed modern world, there's a voyeurism for that. There's a desire for that. And that's kind of scary. Like people probably, in the beginning of the Nazis in the Weimar era, they were highly cultured people and kind of like, you know, there's lots of arts and lots of but then they were seized by this murderous kind of force, which is one aspect of war, right? The kind of just everything breaking down and then the murderousness coming out. The other aspect of war is, of course, heroism and bravery and risking your life for somebody and all those kind of things. You know, finding out who you really are. And so there's a spiritual dimension to the warrior on some level. um I think.
I mean, it's interesting what you say in terms of, voyeurism and Twitter feeds being full of videos of Ukrainian or Russian soldiers getting blown up, or the missile attacks on Israel, or all over the world. So because there's this concept of Robert Faller, that's an Austrian philosopher, about interpassivity, and it does so it means you don't do the thing, but you enjoy it kind of passively. And,
Mm,
so he has like this idea. So why do we record a movie instead of going to the cinema and watch it, right? Because it's like if it's on tape, or like better example, you go to a concert and instead of dancing and enjoying the live music, you put on your smartphone and record
yeah.
the whole thing. And so that's you're not actively participating anymore. And so he designs this term interpassivity for this.
Yeah.
And the same thing is kind of true for this, war porn on Twitter. Well, you're not in a, because it's like a bourgeois, as you say, phenomenon. You're not actively participating anymore, but what you do is kind of via Twitter very close to it, and you know
Hmm.
participating, inactively in a kind of way.
Yeah.
And
Well, I was thinking of Marshall McLuhan as well, who talked about the difference between radio and TV. In the beginning, when these technologies were invented, radio had this incredible sort of hypnotic effect on everybody. Like, on both sides of the war, like Hitler and Churchill, he would give these incredible radio addresses and would hypnotize the whole population to get together and either fight the Nazis or become a Nazi. It's like incredible that he would call hot media because it heatens it brings out our primal instincts somehow or gets us all riled up about something, right? Propaganda movies and radio and all of that. Whereas when television was invented during the Vietnam War, this he said this this made the war unpopular because it was cooling down the war in a sense because people weren't excited about it. People were just seeing the images, right? People were seeing these horrible images, for the first time ever, they were seeing the actual carnage of war without the propaganda story accompanied by it. Um, and then so there was all this anti-war movements and things like that. It was a reaction against fascism and communism and these intense ideologically possessed movements into a more interest in consumerism and but soap commercials and stupid TV shows and getting a car and post-war kind of cooling down of the situation. He said it was really made possible by TV, which he called a kind of a cooling media. So I thought that's interesting how media can be hot, it can work us up, but it can also make us very passive. It can make us very
right,
excited about stuff and we want to go out to war and fight something, and but it could also make us extremely sort of passive and more, feminine in our approach, let's say,
right,
to reality, as we talked about before. I mean, not saying that femininity is passive, but we talked about the passive nature of the internet and all of this
right.
um, consuming of the thing. So you don't like you were saying, so you don't have to actually uh, you don't have real skin in the game. So you're safe. You're outside, but you also want to know about the serial killer and these things that are beyond your hermetically sealed little worlds or seemingly sealed worlds.
Yeah. I mean, the question that is arising from all of this, at least to me, is so what happens if a culture is not acknowledging, um, you know, the tendencies within themselves that are warlike in a kind of way.
Mm.
Because like if we
Mm.
if we accept the fact that war in different kind of shades is part of
Mm.
our nature, but we insist of being bourgeois and good people that don't want war. So we suppress all these dark, revolutionary, horrendous, transformatory, momenta from our soul. We suppress that because we think it's bad, and then we suddenly are confronted with media, and but you can't really suppress the id. So you have to
Mm.
kind of the question that I'm trying to pose is how much suppressed unconscious is responsible for, inciting wars uh, unconsciously, through delivery of weapons,
Well,
through it's like when you sorry to one last sentence. Lo, if you I mentioned that book last time, the Human Smoke,
yeah.
about the beginning of the Second World War. And what becomes apparent that it was not a Marvel movie. It was just everybody was like kind of hoping and clamoring for, yeah, let's go for war. Even Churchill was elated in the thought that Germany was like attacking Poland because he could go into war. That's like he was the worst warmonger of all, not from of all, but he was like he was really he liked the idea, and
Well,
so
he had to in a way. I mean, in order to get people to embrace this positive destruction, right? To turn a whole population into killers. And I think how quickly, apparently it's miraculously how fast they just made tanks and machine guns, and how everybody just banded together to create this destructive machine. But I was thinking about your quote from Nassim Taleb, because when you
right.
said that, because Taleb was saying that, if Trump's elected, people are going to be like boasting about war and saber clashing, and
Should I
whereas
read it
whereas
maybe
right,
so everybody's
yeah,
on
go ahead,
board?
because that's I think that's very important. I just want to say that maybe that's the point you're trying to make about the repression, right? These peace-loving people, pretended peace-loving people, in the Democrats, they tend to be the ones that are causing the wars these days, or enabling them. So yeah, go ahead.
So that's a quote, X Twitter quote from Nassim Taleb from this morning. And he wrote, I woke up with a disturbing thought. With Camilla there is a near certainty of more wars, coupled with a lot of bullshit about peace initiatives. With Trump, or rather Trump Vance, there's a possibility of peace, coupled with loud saber rattling.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the surprising thing is that when Trump was elected, everybody thought he was the guy that's going to lead the world into nuclear war, and there was like no wars in his. I'm not saying I like him, or it was a. I don't say he's great or anything, but the fact that there was no wars when he was elected, during those 4 years he was elected, and then the Democrats, who tend to be they tend to have a more. I guess they tend to have more of a peace rhetoric, right? They tend to be less will. They seem to want to go less directly into conflict, right? And they seem to be more protective of the the underclass and the victims. And but then they seem to often be the ones that enable all of these wars, because they can't directly confront these kind of tough guys in the Middle East or something. I don't know if my analysis is good. Again, I'm not really making a geopolitical analysis. I'm just kind of it's just intuition and feeling from my perspective. But the
Yeah,
strange
well,
thing is the warrior guy is the one that kind of stops the war, or that's a possibility. Go ahead, sorry.
no, but what you're talking about is the Sean Connery effect we were talking about in one of our podcasts. There's this famous interview where he was asked by Barbara Walters if his, sentence that, he likes to slap a woman every now and then, if he still stands by it. And she says, of course you have to slap her once in a while. And so the point is that he never had to, and he was married for 50 years and never hit his woman because he was in touch with his
With his
darker part,
beast, yeah, with
with
the
his
beast,
beast. And so he was like, oh no, I'm able to, but
yeah,
because I never have to,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so because he was putting up boundaries, and it's like, it's not politically correct to do this, but the issue is, and so I'm calling this the Sean Connery effect. It's like, um, Trump as well as Nixon considered the worst presidents, from a democratic viewpoint. But they were good, in terms of foreign policies. Nixon didn't start a war. He so and what he did, he was like opening the markets to China.
Mhm.
He was a bad, president in terms of, internal
Yeah, yeah.
politics, but not foreign policies. And so the same goes for Trump. I mean, it's very strange that these kinds of personas non gratas kind of are, in terms of foreign policy, they're not that bad as the Democrats like Clinton and Obama or whatever. It's like it's
Well,
very.
maybe the problem with those guys, like they're very likable. Obama was very likable. He's still very likable. But where's the beast in him? Where is it? You don't see it. It seems like a nice guy, like a diplomat, he's smooth, right? Um, so people like that, they're so smooth. They're diplomats. But we need the beasts, especially if there's beastly things going on somewhere else. So I don't know. I mean,
What strikes
um,
me just so weird is that all the people that I would expect, are, on a personal level in contact with their inner beast, right? With their dark side, that those people are rallying up for Trump. So you have Nassim Talib, who is like, I love his books, right? Then you have
yeah,
people like Tulsi Gabbard, she's a war veteran, very clear-minded
yeah, and
and
these are Democrats, right?
yeah.
The
And then you
Democrats are
have
moving over to Trump
And then
because
you
they
have
they
Robert Kennedy, who is
yeah.
like who did so much for environmental protection. And I mean, maybe he's weird, I don't know him, but I mean, he obviously in the last 40 years had his mind and heart in the right place. And so he is rallying for Trump. And it's like, I don't really understand what's going on there, but it's like all the people that, uh, have some clear perspective and are not captured by, the media machines. Like, okay, so you know, let's have a different view on
Yeah, it's a
this.
strange thing. And they're the guys who are Democrats, like Kennedy is a Democrat, and he's moving over, and all these people who are who the Democratic Party should be are moving over to because the Democratic Party right now is not the Democratic Party. That's the weird thing. It seems to me they're not who they used to be. They're the opposite, and they're a simulacrum, and they're sort of smooth, and they're sort of a machine, like a well-oiled machine. But we don't feel the beast. We don't feel the humanity. We don't feel anything in them. So that seems to be the problem. And then so it's just an inverse. And in the day, the Democrat, they were supporting the working people, supporting the unions, supporting all those things. Whereas it appears to be the Republicans, which is a weird switcheroo. Whereas the Democrats seem to be obsessed with all these sort of pseudo issues, or you know, um, but I don't really like to get too political on this podcast.
So
It's just the feeling of like we're living in the inversion of what was happening like 10 years
what
ago.
I feel, and that kind of brings these two things together,
Yeah.
politics and the more abstract, thoughts on war. It's like I think in a kind of way that we have very hippie-ish conceptions about what evolution is.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
It's like
Hmm.
we have very, very soft and fluffy ideas, and so we sit a little bit in the meditation, and maybe we go through some psychodrama and all of this, and that would be more kind of the progressive democratic kind of thing, It's like, oh, we make the toilets right for everybody, and then we're fine, and we everybody
Hmm.
has the same choices and the same options, and then everything's fine.
This is
But I
upper
don't,
class,
yeah,
too,
but I
also,
don't
right?
think evolution. I don't think evolution is nice and soft. I think evolution is a uh, brutal force, in the Schopenhauerian
Yeah.
sense. It's like that, just plowing through time,
I think
right?
it's
And just let me have
sorry,
this
sorry.
the sentence. So and the most and so to tie this together, I think the most obvious manifestation of evolution is war.
Hmm.
It's brutal, it's horrific, it destroys landscapes and populations, but in a kind of way, that's what evolution is and always was. It's not
Yeah.
just, the soft kind of mental thing that we do. It's I think like evolution itself, it's a death struggle. And that's why I like the movie, The Thin Red Line, because that's what the movie is pointing towards, this eternal struggle of existence with itself, basically.
Yeah. I mean, my reaction to that is that it's both. It's both, nature is both. It's both this brutal struggle, Darwinian kind of struggle, but it's also this insanely delicate, beautiful thing at the same time. I think
Right,
that the Thin Red Line gives you both that.
right.
It doesn't give you just, it's not like a Stanley Kubrick movie where it's just like it's just brutal all the way through. It kind of it shows you the texture, the delicate texture of the plants and the animals and so it's yeah, but also shows you the predator and creatures eating each other. It's hard for us to really understand that we live in a world where creatures eat each other. It's like that's quite something in our nice sort of intellectual kind of protected civilized world. So I think it's Rousseau and Marquis de Sade. And as soon as you're too much on one side or the other, if you get too much in the straight up evolutionary perspective of nature, you're Marquis de Sade, right? And that's what nature is. It's like that story I told you at the beginning, buck naked eating babies and you know and then but then there's also the transcendental aspect as well on the other side. So I think they're both working together, but on a cultural level, yes, I agree with you. I think there's a bunch of hippies that are sort of, but they're not really even hippies. They're just kind of rich people, rich new age people who don't have they have a distaste for the edginess and danger and brutality of life, and they just want to avoid that. So it's an avoidance, and they're not into contact with that part of themselves either, as we all aren't really. I mean, it would be hard to, but we still have to think about it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I think you could even make with Nietzsche or Schopenhauer make the case that even spiritual endeavors are evolutionary war-like. And I mean, I don't mean war
Hmm.
per se, but there are like you have to, in order to really achieve a higher state of meditation or
Mm.
whatever, you have to sacrifice so much to be like one of these, artists of the mind, independently of what you're doing. This image of Nietzsche of the Übermensch walking the tightrope.
Hmm.
It's one misstep and you fall down and you're dead. But all the people looking up, it's like they're kind of trying to imitate and but they're acknowledging the high wire act, and I think like to really go into deep state meditation, that's a
Oh,
high
agreed.
wire act, and in order to really achieve, these, we talked about these higher samadhis, that it's not something that you do in passing. It's something that you have to fight, and you have to sweat blood and tears, and to sacrifice lots of your personal life, lots of your conceptions about who you are. And it's like you could make the case that spiritual transcendence is also kind of warlike. I'm stretching the metaphor here, I know, but it's like the case that I want to make is that I think that evolution and I mean the violent revolution or the long-term developmental evolution that permeates every level of existence, be it the animal kind of way, the social, the mental, all of these, the spiritual. It's like you can't, I think in a kind of way that evolution is a god.
Hmm.
It's like if, in a kind of way, it's like if we're having a spiritual, ambition, evolution is a god, and this and evolution is the highest god that we have.
Hmm. I have to think about that. I totally agree with you in terms of the epic struggle that is usually needed to get to some kind of transcendental state, even if it's just becoming good at football, right?
Right.
But it could be also, becoming enlightened or something like that. It's if when you read the stories of what people go through, there's an intensity that's almost unimaginable for the ordinary person. On the other hand, I'm always doing the on the other hand. Sometimes it just happens by chopping wood, right? So in a way, it's not just a brutal, hard struggle. It's a brutal, hard struggle to realize effortlessness. That's not a struggle. That it's just there is something like you could call it grace or whatever you like, but but I think there's both sides of that story. I think it's a very hard path and a very easy path. It's like there's a paradox there because it's just coming back to the um, and the fact that it's hard is only because we've 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 made ourselves very. It's only because we've tied ourselves up in knots and we're confused and that's why we need this epic struggle. Whereas if we were just clear, then we wouldn't need that.
Yes. And I think there is a way to frame that from biology to make it a little bit clearer um, because you say grace, and I agree, right? So there are two
Hmm.
ways. And I think, to look at the natural sciences and especially biology, that helps to frame that because, as far as I understand, there are two concepts of evolution in biology that kind of um, work in tandem, right? And so first you have the Darwinian notion of
Hmm.
evolution, which works in a kind of way that it's about long distances of time and incremental little uh, transformations that are not really violent, really. And it's something that you do, like attributed to our life. You do something, you chop wood, and through the accumulation of incremental little changes, suddenly the big one by grace appears. And it's just,
Hmm.
it's not really a violent process. It's a long process about in biology about millennia, right? This is a classical Darwinian notion of evolution. And then you have, beginning with the complexity science in the 80s, 90s of the last century, there was like a secondary insight of how evolutionary progress works, and this is the violent kind of one from one moment to the other explosion of
Hmm.
complexity and the rapid change of paradigms and of it's like it took millennia for the unicellular organisms to
Yeah.
but then the leap into multicellular organisms, which was violent, that happened in a very short amount of time. And so you have two perspectives on evolution that kind of complement each other, the long term and the violent short term one. And I think
Hmm.
that's in a psychological sense, that is what you're referring to. So you can have the violent struggle, but you can also have the incremental long term thing where something then happens by grace, as you say.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, traditionally in Zen, they call it, there was this sort of struggle between the people who are talking about sudden enlightenment and gradual enlightenment, like the schools that were saying, sudden enlightenment, in the Rinzai tradition, there's very much like very abrupt kind of teachings where you kind of
Right.
shock somebody into enlightenment. And then there's the gradual enlightenment, which is just daily activity over time. And it's not that there's one or the other. It's just they're a singularity. I mean, daily we do we do the gradual practice, and then maybe there might be a quantum, a leap, like in Gurdjieff's system from one octave to the other octave, or something like that. There could be a leap in consciousness. Yeah. So maybe
Yeah,
I
but
like the sudden and the gradual are not. are not contradictory of each other. They're part of the same process of evolution, I would say. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
that's why I mean that's evolution as a god,
Hmm.
you know? So because it's like it kind of is the underlying structure of everything. You know, that what Schopenhauer meant by, the all, the blind will underlying and permeating basically everything and transforming
Mm,
basically everything. And so
mm,
there's like this notion of coming back to war, that war is, doing politics with other means. And so
yeah.
normally we treat war as something that is outside the norm. But if we take that, what you say, as for granted, if we take that seriously, so then war is not the exception. War and is the norm, is a appendix of normal politics.
Hmm.
It's not the exception, it's the norm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to this I don't know rabbi talk about in a Jewish I don't know leader of some kind talk about what happened in October 7th, and he said that if we were using normal war rules, what you would do is you'd lay siege, right, to all of what is it, all of Gaza, and the war would have been over in 2 weeks because people would have been hungry. And but we have the United Nations that doesn't allow that kind of thing anymore, right? Right? And so the whole thing blew up into something just way more terrible than it might have been if we were really honest about ourselves that okay, somebody tried to invade and now we have to go to war. And we have to do everything possible to end the war as quickly as possible because the point of war, right, is to end war, right? I mean, obviously, like if you're going to go to war, your motivation should be to sort of end war, which is it's a crazy paradox, right? Because you're going to have to do the most terrible things. So I would say that like in that case, or it's like, how do you end this war? As quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. And if you kill more people than you should, then you failed, right? But if you don't kill enough people to end the war just goes on and on and on and on and on forever. So we can't get rid of killing. Um, you know, there has to be some killing in war because it just that's what a war is, and there's just no way around it because there's violations of communities and people, and then when that happens, you have to go to war. I don't know if
Yeah,
I'm
well, the
being
issue.
clear in what I was saying,
No,
but
absolutely clear. The point is that too much of the discourse in terms of, Israel and Palestine is concerned about the question like who started it, who's responsible. That's not the point. That's
yeah,
it's like there's no way you can sort this out. And even if you could, it makes no sense to do this
yeah,
because at this state it's like how can you how can you end it?
yeah.
It's like
Mhm. And how do you end it in the long term, right? Because you could have a ceasefire. Oh, there should be a ceasefire. There should be a ceasefire. You could end it, but then how do you end it in the long term so it doesn't happen in the future, right? How do you, so it's so complicated and it's such a dangerous business. But one thing is you have to win the war. You have to win a war. You can't just leave it because then it just comes back again if it's not finished, right? But then what does it mean to finish it, and um, what does it mean for it to be over? Again, I'm feeling sort of awkward in talking about it because it's not. I don't have this kind of skin in the game. But it often it feels awkward giving opinions on such things, but
No, I mean, sorry, I was just looking one thing up. I think you're completely right. And I think, it's like in retrospect, you know, while in the present all these things seem horrible, in retrospect sometimes it's good that these things happen. I mean, it's good that Churchill and Roosevelt went to the war. It's good that I was just looking up the Reconquista in the 7th 8th century, where the Spanish reclaimed their mainland basically in a brutal war, and they just
Mhm.
had this tiny bit north of Spain, which was not invaded by the South African Moors basically, and this kind of Christ-like war figure went on a spree and reclaimed basically all of Spain, again, for the
Mhm.
Christians. And it's like, you want that to be over fast and soon, but
Yeah.
you have to be swift and without, in a kind of sense, without mercy. And it's horrible to say that, but you need that to be in order to be over soon, to make sure that these things don't happen in the future. And so that's where you're right. And I think, like, in terms of Israel and Palestine, you don't want just, a ceasefire that, just waits to be for the Palestinians to attack again in 1 year or five. You want this problem over once and for all. And so how do you do
Mhm. Yeah.
that?
How do you do that? Yeah. Yeah.
So especially because, like, again, we said it before, it's like Israel is a tiny tiny country in a vast sea of uh, you know
Yeah. And also,
so
it's not something that started, it's been going on for so long. So obviously, whatever they've been trying to do in the past hasn't been working. So, I don't know when the whole conflict started between Israel and Gaza. I don't know the history that well, but it's something that's just happening and happening and happening and happening. And I think often maybe some of the problem is that some of the search for peace sometimes, right? All the good will in the world, to create a peaceful agreement between people, it doesn't always work, right? Obviously. So, and it's often very naive, and it just prolongs the inevitable that's going to happen, because there's this strange thing that happens to people. They just get taken over by that force, right? Um, that force of destruction, you know.
yeah, but
Yeah.
again, sorry, but the problem is, again, that sounds utterly, what we're saying, utterly, what is the proper word for this? um Out of it sounds so out of touch with reality, because obviously we don't want war, but this is like the cognitive dissonance I'm trying to
Yeah.
point towards, from the beginning of our conversation. It's like, of course, the world should be free of war, but then again, existence means war. How do you, because, like, you can't, how do you have a normal conversation? How do you have a normal conversation about war, the consequences of war, and all of this, um, about all these things, when it's obviously a terrible thing? So how do you get to a conclusion? Like, if you take, like, any conflict, if it's Russian Ukraine, or Israel Palestine, so where do you put your flag in the sand? Where do you say enough is enough, or, like, where do you say, uh, uh, I don't know how to approach this topic,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I don't know. I was thinking about something. I don't know. Krishnamurti. Somebody was, talking about war to him, and he's like, "You're causing the war." He was pointing at this person, just a normal person. Like, in a way, it's a inner jihad with ourselves. So, every move we make in the direction of sort of unconscious conflict is related to every other move that we make. And so how I see it as sort of, how do we conquer the war? How do we go to war with ourselves to conquer that blind, um predatory impulse, which is in ourselves. And so it's like meditating on that seems to be all I can do, anyway. You know, okay, am I going to go to war with Tom at this podcast and like say something that, just not listen to his argument and just sort of say something, brutal and kind of like unkind, and that there I'm doing war, right? Well, and then on other times, if Tom's making taking advantage of me, then I'm gonna, say you're full of shit, Tom, and I might not be polite. So there's always this conflict, and then war is just the largest version of that.
Right.
It's just the largest version of the inner jihad, as the Muslims call it.
Yeah.
You know,
And
and
yet
I go
maybe
to
the
war
Mhm.
with myself every day. Like I wake up and I'm like pulled into things that I'm not. I have to get back in. Pulled into unconscious behaviors, and you have to fight with it and get on track and make sure that you resist your own uh, aggressive, ignorant tendencies, or something.
Yeah, I mean you're completely right because I mean war this whole thing is a paradox because you can hope for no war, but a world without no war would be no world at all. You
No,
know,
no
if
way.
because it's like on a personal level, it's like what you are or what I am is the result of the struggles that I overcame within myself and the solutions that I found. You know, for the daily struggles I face when I going up in the morning, waking up. That's exactly what you meant and or described. And so I wake up, I have conflicts, I try to resolve them, and
Yeah.
I'm the sum of these impulses and these solutions that I've found. And a culture is nothing else. It's like it's the sum of all the conflicts and the solutions that we temporarily found. And nature is the same thing. And so a world without war, a world without conflict, a world without struggle is no world because there's nothing there. And so we are thrown into this paradox that we don't want war, but we are the result of it. You know, and
Hmm.
so maybe there is no solution for navigating it, except to acknowledge that there are questions that are not solvable because it's like what I mean. This is the example from 1984 and from the fascists. It's like if you set out to design a society that is so uniform, that all the struggles, internal struggles, are pacified. You only you only achieve this by one making up arbitrary wars on the outside,
Hmm.
and and secondly to suppress every voice that is dissenting, which is also like a kind of eternal war again. So you never get rid of that problem, even if you have like a completely, you know,
Yeah.
pacified society.
You end up drowning the world in blood eventually, right? In your little
Right.
passive society. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was thinking, the Sufis would say that this is more, let's say, esoteric, but the Sufis say that when you make a sacrifice of samadhi, like concentrated, you know, practice or meditation or, prayer, whatever, in any religion, there's a different form of that. When you do that, you're kind of you're making a sacrifice of that predatory thing, and that prevents war. It's not, it doesn't look like it does, but 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 the that's the solution to war, is to make some kind of a sacrifice, which is acknowledging that the war is always there and always it can take you over at any point. Um, I don't know if that makes sense, but it always kind of made sense to me that in order to stop war, you have to make some kind of a sacrifice. Because if you just run on your unconsciousness, if we just have, let's say, really good ideas, right? really nice principles. We have a new constitution and all this that prevent war and that it doesn't work because something's going to go wrong, right? Uh-huh. It only doesn't go wrong if there's a really intrinsic change inside of yourself um or if you make that right kind of sacrifice, I think. And even then the war might come and take you over and anytime, it's actually surprising that me and you have lived like our entire life without being subject to a war, which wasn't the case for most of history and most human beings. I don't think. I think almost every civilization person at least had some contact with war, and we don't. So that's kind of strange. Like that's almost miraculous.
Well, there's a flip side to the sacrifice, and I think it's again two sides. It's one, it's the sacrifice, that's true, and the other side, and it's something that I would verbalize as something that I would also attribute to the Republicans in a kind of way, to the good Republicans, not
Hmm.
the current ones, but you know the there's the saying, and I somewhat attribute it also to movie stars like Clint Eastwood or Mel Gibson. It's just you know don't fight, but if you fight, fight for winning.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So it's like
Don't have
choose
to
your.
fight
Yeah,
because you're
no, you
just gonna.
don't have to. But if you fight, fight for the win. It's
Yeah.
like there's a better description for that, but this is the gist of it because it's like don't be drawn into something and do it
Mhm.
half-assed, but do it, and that's your sentiment. Do
Yeah.
it hard and quickly and be over with it, And so and that's the way to deal with that drama because sometimes you can evade it, but if you can't evade it any longer, or if your moral says you have to do it to win, and don't
Mhm.
make any prisoners,
Yeah,
basically.
because otherwise, if you do something in half-ass kind of way, you end up creating a lot more violence through passive aggressivity, right?
Right.
So there's a whole passive aggressive thing going on at the same time. It's like if you're not really in touch with your own inner violence or your own potential for violence, then you're going to push that down, and it's going to make you passive aggressive, and then you spiritualize everything and da da da, and then suddenly you're things have got really weird and crazy, and you're in a death cult, things can, so it's really it is a question of the full gestalt, and not the half-assed thing, um, which is kind of hard to say because I feel a little bit half-assed about saying it because I don't really want to say that, I don't want to say it. I don't want to um I don't I lied I like the discomfort is that being theoretical about it in the face of actual war is kind of that's why there's a tension in the conversation because then there's war and oh that's
Maybe we end on that note because, in a kind of sense, this conversation is obscene
yeah, yeah, exactly. um Maybe we
because,
have to have it. Maybe we have to talk about it. But in the face of the thing, what can you say about, you know, missing limbs and dead children and
right, yes, and then
hellscapes
there,
and
so there,
mothers
the
weeping and just
right,
the unimaginable horrors and suffering. What can you say about that? I mean, and how could you ever want that for anybody? You know,
right.
So
Yeah, but that's why these conversations are so difficult and why these conversations are at the same time important and obscene. That's what I feel about this because it's like it's easy to talk about these things, in the security of Mallorca. I mean, come on.
mhm.
It's how do but I mean at the same time maybe there's somebody out there who finds a better coding
Yeah.
for these things.